On the streets of Moscow, the economic crisis is worsening by the hour with the Russian currency in freefall. The ruble has now lost 50% of its value so far this year, with the price of oil also in freefall, going from $115 a barrel to $60 just since June. The problem for Russia, nearly half its revenues come from oil and gas.
Vladimir Putin has not been photographed lately bearing his manly chest doing manly things in a manly fashion. Likely due to the fact his country is taking a deep downward economic slide, the people are starving, and winter's here. In other words, just another day in Russian paradise. So then, how can the West make all this work for them? It's a pleasure to welcome back into MidPoint the senior economic consultant for Euro-Pacific Capital and the man which we always call on for true insight into the European theater, John Browne. John, always a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you. Good morning to you.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever we are. Let's go ahead and get right to it. The ruble exchange rate went from 59 to 80 to the dollar, or 80 to 59 to the dollar. That's dropping. We are seeing people desperate for goods and for food in Russia. Honestly, John, are we looking and are we on the road to a complete collapse of the Russian economy?
Well, it certainly threatens. It's extremely worrying for Russia. I mean, Russia has, as you rightly said in the preview, roughly 45% of its revenues come from oil and gas. And what's more important in a way is that its budget break-even price for oil is somewhere between $102 and $117 per barrel. So when you get today's prices, it means that Russia, which was already nearing recession, is having to cut back on government spending and could force a recession into a real depression. So it's a very, very major economic threat. They have about 500 billion of reserves, but in today's currency markets, that's a very vulnerable figure. There are rumors, in fact, the front page of the Financial Times today, an article was someone was suggesting they might move to gold backing for the ruble to try and save the ruble from further collapse. But I mean, the Russian citizens have already lost 50% of the value of their ruble this year, over 50% this year, of the value of their savings and all ruble-denominated instruments. So it's a very serious thing. But of course, Russia, one must remember, although it may be an economic pygmy, relatively speaking, to the major economic powers, it's still a major military power with nuclear weapons. And so if you force such a power recklessly to be desperate, to become desperate, not only does it have a spillover effect into the world financial markets, but it also has a spillover into the military geopolitical situation.
Well, but we always talk about the fact that Putin is a smart guy. He comes from the era of the Soviet Union. He's former KGB. You bring up the topic of nuclear weapons. Seriously, John, though, even if this Russian economy completely collapses, would Putin be that stupid? Would he be that foolish, that desperate to use nuclear weapons somehow to bring Russia back to prominence? It doesn't seem as if he might be a little bit egotistical, but not that insane.
Well, I don't know if you're quite right. He is egotistical, as are many leaders. But I don't know about insane. You know, Russia was very, very hurt by what they feel was the giveaway under Gorbachev in the era of President Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and the new peace and glasnost and everything else. They felt really hurt to be as if they just surrendered their former empire, and they've got a hankering. They're a proud nation. They will sort of want to get it back. And the sort of treaty that was done with the NATO alliance and Russia as a result of the Reagan-Gorbachev talks was that we would each leave each other's older former sphere of influence alone. But the West actually has been sort of fairly aggressive using covert forces in trying to win over some of the former Soviet countries into the Western sphere and even into NATO. And of course, some of the people actually wanted to come because they liked the Western style freedom.
But you don't see him putting his finger on the button, though, seriously, because of money.
Well, I don't think the finger on the strategic nuclear button, but I'm sure that his planners must be thinking our savior is to get that oil price up. And so we've got to think of ways of getting it up. And, you know, one of the more outlandish ways of getting it up may be interference, whatever you call it, sabotage in oil supplies around the world. You're forcing a military nuclear power, or let's say just a very strong nuclear power, into a situation of desperation.
All right, hold on
It's
just
very
a few.
unhealthy because.
Hold on a few minutes here, John. We're right up against the clock. Stay with us. John Browne will be back after the break. We're going to dive into what was once a red-hot topic of global interest, but as in the past few weeks seemed to tail off, seemed to being the operative word in Ukraine.